So in this video, we're going to go into a little bit more depth regarding breakpoints. So I'm going to pull open the JavaScript console. And to get to a file, we can either click on sources right here. Otherwise, we can use the shortcut Command or Control P. And all of our code that we've written is in application.js. Now I'm just going to scroll up and insert a breakpoint. This is the function that prepares our chart data and formats it so it can be displayed so chart.js can render the chart. I'm going to go ahead and put a breakpoint here and then go ahead and refresh. Okay, so I'm going to widen the right column here. So there's a few important things to go over. So in this second section right here, we have what's called a call stack. This is the path in which we get to the current spot that we're at. So if we were to just start at the very bottom of the stack trace, so this is our, so this whole script is wrapped in a immediately invoked function expression. So that's our starting point. And then if we come in here, Axios, that's being used to, that's our Ajax library that fetches the data from the server. And then inside here is our callback. And then from line 117, which is right here, this calls the function that we're in right now. So that's how call stack works. And if we go into the next section, so this is scope. So everything inside of the local scope, that's going to be all the variables that are declared and used inside our function. And then we also have this keyword. In this case, it refers to the window object. And that's also called the global object. So this is going to have a whole bunch of stuff in it. And then since we did wrap this script in an iffy immediately invoked function expression, that keeps everything off of the global scope, which is what we want to do. And the next thing to cover is the closure. Since we did use the immediately invoked function expression, so what this pattern does is this is a convention for keeping to turn your code into modules, so it keeps everything off inside of here off the global scope. That way we don't have any conflicts or anything like that. So all the functions that are inside this block are going to be in this closure section right here. Another thing we could do is we can uncheck this, and then if we were to go back down to our line, you'll see that this is disabled. When this is disabled, that means it's not going to run, but it's still there, versus if we just remove it all together, it's going to disappear from this breakpoint section. So one handy thing is if you set these up to where you can just toggle them on and off, you can pause when you want to pause and just let everything run. And another thing too is if, let's say we have a bunch of breakpoints, what we can do, I'm just going to refresh this really quick. If we click this once, it's going to take us to the next breakpoint. And then notice that there's a thing down here, so we can hold or click, and then as soon as we let go, it's going to skip the remaining breakpoints and just execute the rest of the code. So that's a very handy feature as well. So the next thing that we need to cover is we can, so what we have right here is a for loop. We have a breakpoint here, and then we can step completely over. Otherwise, let's say there's a whole bunch of items. I think in this case, there's only 6 items, but sometimes you're gonna have hundreds of items, and you just want to step over the next function call. So that's gonna jump from the beginning of your for loop all the way to the next statement, which is going to be the object that's being returned. I'm going to Command R to refresh again. So we have several different options. So this for each, what we have is a function right here. So it's going to iterate through each item and pass each item in this list is going to be passed in here. And then we're creating a new array for the chart labels and the chart data. So we can step into this function call, and you notice that so a lot of this stuff in here is going to change. So since we're inside of this closure, the only local variables are going to be the item object, because that's what's being passed in right here. And now this closure becomes prepare chart data, which is the function that this for each loop is nested in. And then so we're going to have our variables that we declared right here. So that's going to be that prepared the function closure. And then we're also inside. So not only are we inside this function, but this function is inside the immediately invoked function expression, which is everything in this script basically. So that's why we have two closures listed here. And then finally, the most parent item is going to be the global object, which is the window. So that's kind of how this whole scope section works. So this can be really handy if you just need to get an overview of what's in here. Okay, so this watch section right here can be very handy in certain situations. Let me refresh. So now we're in scope. Let's say we want to watch this chart labels variable. So what I'm going to do is click on the plus and then copy in chart labels. So currently there's nothing in there. It's just an empty array. And so what I'm going to do for this, I'm going to put this in here. So we still have nothing because we have not pushed anything to this array yet. But if we iterate it once more, so now we have a single item in here. And the item it's pushing is, so from this item object, we have the AGI range. So we're just making these. These are going to be the chart labels for every single one of the bars that are in the chart. And as we go through each item in the for each loop, we're appending a new item or a new AGI range. AGI is just adjusted gross income. So these are just income intervals basically. So being able to watch a variable and watch the changes throughout a certain part of your code can be very powerful. It could be and could speed up your debugging. Okay, in this next example, let's say, so we have this breakpoint right here. So this breakpoint is going to stop the code no matter what each time it's reached. Now let's say we don't want to pause the code unless there's something in this variable. So right now it's just an empty array. So what we can do is called a conditional breakpoint. So I'm going to toggle this off and then I'm going to add a conditional breakpoint. And let's say we want chart labels length is greater than 0. And you notice that it went from being blue to orange, so that's lets you know that it's a conditional breakpoint. So I'm going to go ahead and refresh the page. And notice here that, so in our watch variable, we have chart labels, we have a value here already. So that means that this is already in its second iteration through this for each loop, because the first time it went through, chart labels was had a length of 0, it was an empty array. And the second time it added this first property. And then since this line that we're stuck on the breakpoint is not executed yet. So if we were to go down to the next line, then yeah, this would be pushed. So the first time it went through this, it's basically was skipped and it did not pause the code. So this is a feature that could come in handy, especially with edge cases where certain conditions apply. You can just set a conditional breakpoint to stop the code when a certain variable has a value that you normally wouldn't expect. Another handy feature that we have available is this option here to pause on exceptions. So this is anytime it runs into an error, it'll just pause everything and you'll be able to see all your variables and stuff that are in scope. So what I'm going to do is come in here, make a mistake. Let's just comment this variable out so that way the first time it comes through here, it tries to push an item onto an array that's never been declared basically. So let's return to Chrome and then I'm going to go ahead and refresh the page. Notice that there's no set breakpoints over here, so those have been removed. However, it's paused on this one item right here where so this is the line of code that is problematic because we don't have this variable declared, so it's trying to push an item onto the array. And then so just like before, we can come down here into the scope section and then see all of the variables that are in scope inside of our for each loop. And we can see the exception is also thrown in here. So clicking the stop icon up here, this can be a really valuable tool to use if you're trying to track down errors that are in your code.